The night before my wedding, my fiancé looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Tomorrow is going to be the happiest day of my life." I smiled. I believed him. What I didn't know was that 12 hours earlier, he had bought another wedding ring for another woman, and the woman wasn't his ex. She was my maid of honor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I was about to marry the safest man I'd ever known. His name was Julian. We had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. Our wedding was scheduled for Saturday. There were 146 guests. The venue was booked, the flowers were paid for. My dress was hanging in my mother's spare bedroom. My grandmother had already sewn a tiny piece of blue fabric into the inside of my gown for something blue. Everything was ready, except the groom, and I didn't know that yet. It started with a text message. Thursday night, 2 days before the wedding. Julian was downstairs in the garage. I was sitting on the couch when my phone buzzed. It was from him. "Don't come downstairs yet. I need to take care of something." I stared at the message. I was confused. He was literally downstairs. I replied, "What are you doing?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, nothing, just fixing something on the car. That didn't sound strange. Julian was always fixing something. But 10 minutes later, I heard the garage door open, then close, then open again, then close. I walked toward the window. His car was gone. I called him. No answer. I didn't think much of it. Until midnight. He still wasn't home. At 12:17 a.m., he finally walked through the door. He looked exhausted. I asked, "Where were you?" He dropped his keys onto the table. "Getting something." "What?" He smiled. "You'll see Saturday." I laughed. "Is it a wedding surprise?" He nodded. "Something like that." I kissed him and went to bed. That was the last time I trusted a surprise, because the next morning, I found the ring. It was inside his car. I wasn't looking for it. I was searching for my phone charger. My charger had fallen between the seats. I reached under the passenger seat. My fingers touched a small black box. I pulled it out. At first, I thought it was jewelry for me. Maybe a necklace, maybe earrings, maybe something sentimental. Then I opened it. There was a ring inside, a wedding ring, not mine. It was beautiful, white gold, small diamond, engraved on the inside. I turned it toward the light and read the engraving. "Forever starts with you." My hand started shaking because my ring didn't have that engraving. I knew. I had chosen my ring myself. I sat inside the car for almost 5 minutes. Then I heard footsteps. Julian opened the garage door. I quickly closed the box. He looked at me. "What are you doing?" I held up the box. His face changed. Not surprise, not confusion. Fear. Pure fear. I asked, "Who's this for?" He didn't answer. "Julian." Still nothing. Then he said, "Give me the box." I laughed. "Why?" "Claire, please. Who's it for?" He looked toward the garage door, then back at me, and said, "It's not what you think. I swear, if I never hear that sentence again, it'll still be too soon." I opened the box again. "Then tell me what I should think." He took a breath. "This is complicated." "No, it's actually very simple. You're getting married tomorrow, and you have another wedding ring in your car." He said, "I didn't buy it for another woman." I stared at him. "Then who did you buy it for?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Can we talk about this tonight?" "No." "Claire, no." He finally said, "It's a gift." I asked, "For who?" He looked at me. "For someone who helped us." That made even less sense. "Who?" He refused to answer, and that was the moment I realized something. Julian wasn't afraid I'd misunderstood. He was afraid I'd discovered something. I put the ring back in the box. Then I said, "Fine." He looked relieved. I continued, "We'll talk tonight." He nodded, but he didn't know that I had already decided something. I was going to find out who that ring belonged to before tonight. I called my maid of honor, Rachel. Rachel and I had been best friends since college. She knew everything about my relationship. Everything. I trusted her more than anyone. When I told her about the ring, she went silent. Then she said, "Claire, don't confront him again." "Why?" "Just don't." That was strange. I asked, "Do you know something?" She said, "No," too quickly. I knew Rachel. She was terrible at lying. I asked again, "Rachel, what do you know?" She said, I think you should come over. I drove to her apartment. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked terrified. I walked inside. She locked the door behind me. Then she said, Julian knows. Knows what? That you found the ring. I stared at her. How would he know? She didn't answer. Then she pulled out her phone. There was a message from Julian. Did Claire call you? Rachel looked at me. I looked at the screen. Another message appeared. Don't tell her anything. My stomach dropped. I whispered, what is happening? Rachel sat down. I don't know. Then why is Julian telling you not to tell me anything? She started crying, and that's when she finally said, because I was supposed to help him. Help him do what? She looked at me. Leave you. I couldn't breathe. For a few seconds, I couldn't even understand the words. Leave me? She nodded. I asked, when? She said, after the wedding. I laughed because it sounded insane. You're telling me my fiancé planned to marry me and then leave me? Rachel nodded. He told me he wasn't sure about you. I sat down. What did he say? She hesitated. Then, he said he loved you. I looked at her. But he said he wasn't in love with the life you wanted. That sentence hurt more than I expected. I asked, what life do I want? Rachel said, you want stability, kids, a house, a family. And he doesn't? He said he wasn't sure. I stared at the floor. Then I remembered the ring. I asked, Rachel, who is the ring for? She didn't answer. I knew immediately. You know. She shook her head. Please. Who? She finally whispered, Vanessa. Everything went cold. Vanessa. Julian's ex. The woman he had told me he hadn't spoken to in years. The woman who had suddenly started appearing in our lives 6 months earlier. I asked, where is she? Rachel said, she came back 3 weeks ago. I felt sick. Why? Rachel looked at me. She says Julian asked her to. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel. I turned off my phone, and for the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to think about my relationship without defending Julian. Every strange moment suddenly looked different. The late-night calls, the deleted messages, the sudden work trips, the way he started criticizing my clothes, the way he said I was too focused on marriage, the way he kept telling me that Vanessa understood him better. I remembered something he'd said 2 months earlier. Sometimes people get married because they're afraid to start over. At the time, I thought he was talking about someone else. Now I wasn't sure. Around 2 a.m., I turned my phone back on. There were 27 missed calls, most from Julian, 1 from Rachel, and 1 unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice said, Claire? Yes, this is Vanessa. I almost hung up. Then she said, I know about the ring. I froze. What ring? The one in his car. My heart started pounding. How do you know? She said, because I was there when he bought it. I asked, why? She said, that's not the worst part. I sat up. What is? She whispered, he bought 2. I couldn't speak. 2 what? 2 rings. I asked, who is the second one for? She said, I don't know. Then the line went dead. I called back. The number was unavailable. I barely slept. At 7 a.m., Rachel came to my hotel. She looked like she hadn't slept either. I asked, where is Vanessa? Rachel said, she wants to meet you. Where? An old coffee shop downtown. I went. Vanessa was sitting alone. She looked completely different from the woman I'd imagined. She wasn't smug. She wasn't confident. She looked scared. She slid an envelope across the table. I didn't touch it. What is this? Proof. Of what? She said, that Julian has been lying to both of us. Inside were printed screenshots, messages, bank transfers, hotel reservations, and something else, a photograph. Julian and Vanessa together. But the date on the photograph was only 4 weeks ago. I stared at it. Vanessa said, he told you we were secretly seeing each other, didn't he? I looked up. What? He told you that because he wanted you to hate me. I didn't understand. She continued. He wanted you angry at me. Why? So you'd never ask the right questions. I stared at her. What questions? She leaned closer. Where the money is going. I looked at the bank statements. There were transfers from Julian's account, thousands of dollars, but they weren't going to Vanessa. They were going somewhere else, a company I'd never heard of, North Star Events, LLC. I asked, what is this? Vanessa said, I don't know. Then she pulled out another document. That's why I called you. The company had been receiving money from Julian for nearly a year. Monthly payments, large ones, and the most recent payment was made 3 days before our wedding. The amount? $18,700. I stared at the number. What was he buying? Vanessa said, I don't know. Then she pushed another photograph toward me. It showed the inside of our wedding venue. But something was wrong. There was a second table, a second floral arrangement, and a giant banner behind it. I looked closer. The banner said, Congratulations, Julian and Vanessa. My hands went numb. I whispered, he was planning a second wedding. Vanessa nodded, but that's not the twist. I looked at her. She said, the venue wasn't booked for another wedding. Then what was it? She turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 6 words, Project Anniversary, do not tell Claire. I felt like I was falling into a hole. Vanessa said, Claire, I think Julian isn't planning to leave you after the wedding. I stared at her. Then what is he planning? She looked me directly in the eyes. I think he's planning to make you disappear from his life. I couldn't breathe. What does that mean? I don't know. Then why are you telling me this? Because yesterday I found something in his apartment. What? She reached into her purse and placed a key on the table. He told me it opened a storage unit. I looked at it. What storage unit? She said, I think you should find out. The key had a number engraved on it, 314. That afternoon, I went to the storage facility. Unit 314 was rented under Julian's name. The manager recognized me. He said, your husband said you'd come. I froze. My husband? He nodded. He told us his wife might need access. I said, I'm not married. The manager looked confused. He specifically said you'd be married by Saturday. I felt sick. I showed him my ID. He gave me the key. The unit was filled with boxes, wedding decorations, old photographs, documents, and one large black suitcase. Inside the suitcase was a folder. My name was written on it. I opened it. The first page said, Claire, exit plan. My hands started shaking. There were pages and pages. Our finances, our apartment, my work schedule, my family, my friends, even my daily routine. He had documented everything. Then I found something that made no sense. A page titled, When Claire Finds Out. Underneath were 3 options. Option A, blame Vanessa. Option B, blame Claire's trust issues. Option C, make Claire believe she ended the relationship herself. I sat on the floor. I couldn't stop staring at the page. He had planned my reaction. He had planned the breakup. He had planned how I would remember it. Then I found the final page. It said, the only unpredictable variable is Rachel. My blood went cold. Rachel, my best friend. I called her immediately. She answered. I asked, did Julian ever ask you to help him manipulate me? Silence. Then, yes. I closed my eyes. How long? 8 months. 8 months. Almost our entire engagement. I asked, why? She started crying. He promised me he would protect you. What does that mean? He told me you were unstable. I laughed bitterly. He told you that? Yes. What else? He said you were going to leave him. I froze. Leave him? He said you were planning to take the apartment, the savings, everything. I whispered, I never planned any of that. I know. Then why did you believe him? Rachel cried. Because he showed me documents. What documents? She hesitated, then said, fake ones. Everything finally clicked. Julian hadn't been preparing to marry me. He had been preparing for a war I didn't even know existed. But there was still one question. Why? Why spend months manipulating everyone? Why buy 2 rings? Why create a fake second wedding? Why document my entire life? The answer came 2 days later. The police called me. They had found something connected to North Star Events. It wasn't a wedding company. It was a shell company. And Julian wasn't the owner. The owner was someone I knew, someone I'd trusted, someone who had been sitting at my family's dinner table for months. My father. I thought I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. My father had secretly invested in Julian's business. Julian had been losing money, a lot of money, and my family had unknowingly become his financial safety net. But that still wasn't the whole story, because my father hadn't invested voluntarily. Julian had convinced him that I was going to inherit a large amount of money from my grandmother, money that didn't exist. Julian had been planning to marry me, get access to the inheritance, use my family's assets to cover his debts, and if the marriage failed, he had already prepared the documents to make it look like I was the unstable one who abandoned the relationship. The wedding wasn't about love. It was a financial exit strategy. The second ring wasn't for Vanessa. It was a prop, a way to create jealousy, a way to make me angry, a way to make me leave. Because if I broke the engagement, Julian could tell everyone she left me and walk away without looking like the villain. But there was one thing he hadn't planned for: Vanessa. She had saved the messages. Rachel had finally told the truth, and I had found the storage unit. On Saturday morning, Julian called me. He sounded calm, almost cheerful. "Claire, where are you?" I said, "Not at the wedding." Silence. Then, "What?" I said, "You should ask your lawyer." His voice changed. "What did you do?" I smiled. "Nothing." Then I said, "I just stopped doing what you expected." He hung up. An hour later, I received a final message. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I replied, "You're right." Then I finally found out. I blocked him. The wedding never happened. The guests were told it had been canceled because of a private family matter. The venue kept the deposit. The flowers went to a local hospital. The cake was donated. My dress went into storage. And Julian? He was eventually investigated for financial fraud. The exact legal outcome took months. I won't pretend everything became perfect overnight. It didn't. I had to rebuild my life. I had to explain everything to my family. I had to find a new apartment. I had to rebuild friendships. I had to learn how to trust my own instincts again. But something strange happened. About 6 months later, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was the photograph of Julian and me from the night he proposed. On the back was handwriting. Not Julian's, Vanessa's. It said, "You were supposed to find this sooner." There was another photograph behind it. This one was taken 3 days before Julian proposed. He was sitting in a restaurant, across from someone. I looked closer. It was my father. And between them was a folder. I called my father immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then I noticed something written on the photograph. A date. And underneath, the proposal was never the beginning. It was the end of the story I thought I knew. But apparently, it wasn't the beginning either. Because when I finally opened the old folder my father had hidden from me, I found one document. A contract. Signed by Julian, signed by my father, and dated 6 months before Julian ever proposed. At the bottom was one sentence: "Marriage shall proceed only after Claire's trust has been secured." I read that sentence again, and suddenly, the engagement ring on my finger didn't feel like a symbol of love. It felt like evidence. The man I thought had spent 3 years building a future with me had actually spent 3 years building a plan. And the scariest part? He almost succeeded. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the person who betrays you doesn't destroy your life. Sometimes they accidentally reveal it. They show you who was never really on your side. They show you which relationships were built on lies. And they force you to become the person who finally says, "No more." I never married Julian. I never got the apology I wanted. I never got all the answers. But 1 year later, I walked into a courthouse for a completely different reason. I was signing the paperwork for my own business. My name, my money, my decisions, my life. And when I walked outside, I saw a message from an unknown number. One sentence: "Julian is back in town." I stared at it. Then another message appeared, and he says he has something you don't know about your father. For the first time in a year, my hands started shaking because I thought the story was over. It wasn't, not even close.